Okay, so it's 10:31, so I'd like to get started. Welcome everyone to the Joint Center for Extreme Photonics seminar series. This is the fourth in our series, and this morning we have Laura Ramuno from University of Ottawa and Andre Stauda from National Research Council, along with Antonio Calalacina from U Ottawa, and Julio Vampa, who is in Stanford right now. Julio will be joining the National Research Council, we hope in September, if he can get across the border, and will become a fellow of JCEP at that time. So I believe, Laura, you are going to be first up, if you'd like to share your screen.
Hello.
Can you see it?
We're just waiting. Starting. Yeah, and then you want to go to full screen.
Yeah. Okay.
You're not, there you are. Okay, we can see you in full screen now.
Okay, great. So hi everyone. I'm going to be talking today about the project I have with Andre Stauda on high harmonic generation from nanostructured surfaces. So this project brings together the experimental expertise of Andre and his group, particularly in ultra-fast science, including high harmonic generation, with theoretical and computational expertise in my group, particularly in nanophotonics, nonlinear optical microscopy, and high-performance computing. So it's a really complementary expertise that goes into this project. So I'm going to start right off the bat by describing the two goals of our project involving HHG from nanostructured surfaces. And the first is to use high harmonics to measure fields near nanostructures, and that is in real time and with high resolution. So such an ability to measure the electric field surrounding real-world electronic circuits, for example, in semiconductor devices, without any contact with the device, would present a major breakthrough for the semiconductor manufacturing industry, for example. And on the flip side of that, the second goal of the project is to use fields near nanostructures to control HHG. So in both goals, we're relying on the HHG process near the near fields of nanostructures, but here we're actually designing the nanostructures to control or engineer the HHG. Whereas in the first goal, we are trying to interrogate the fields near the nanostructures. So by designing and building these nano-engineered nanophotonic surfaces, we can exert full control over the high harmonics in terms of amplitude, so for enhancement, for example, polarization control of the emitted field, as well as phase control. So this opens the door, to example, for flat optics in at short wavelengths in the deep UV, for example, where there aren't a lot of optical components. As well, it ties in nicely with the project Paul talked about last week on enhancing HHG through plasmonic metasurfaces, and as he talked about last time, we're involved in that project as well, but I won't discuss that part today. So here we're going to talk about both the theoretical and experimental aspects and progress of these goals. But before I do that, I'd like to give a brief overview over the two components that, or the two areas that are married in this project, which are high harmonic generation from solids in general, and also nanostructured surfaces. Okay, so last week Paul gave a pretty detailed introduction into HHG and solids, so I'm not going to go into very much detail here, but I will talk about it a bit in case people have missed the talk last time. So essentially, in 2011, high harmonics were observed for the first time from a solid target, which was zinc oxide. The results are here. And so what happened was when the target was illuminated by an infrared pulse, an HHG spectrum was observed. And the harmonic order that was observed depended on the energy, which is shown in the graph here. So for the highest energy, which was 2.6 microjoules, they saw harmonics up to an order of 25, which is pretty high. Okay, so again, Paul described this all last week, but I want to just go over it very briefly. So there are several mechanisms that can create these harmonics. And the first is very similar to what occurs in gases, where you have electron towing to the presence of a strong field, then acceleration into that field. Whereas the first away from its parent atom and then driven back as the laser inside, and then recombines with the parent. It can recombine with the parent atom, but since it needs so much energy in the laser field, it recombines and it makes a photon much higher energy. And so here I'm going to illustrate kind of a similar process. This is actually stealing a figure from one of Giulio and collaborators' papers that I cite here. So here what we have is, due to the presence of the strong field, the creation of a electrical pair. So this is like the first step in this, incredible three-step process. Then they get accelerated through the band structure. That's what's drawn here. So this I should say is a picture in energy momentum space rather than real space. But in real space, some things occur. The whole electron now get driven apart. The electron reaches the hyperband. It can be combined with the whole, and that's where a high harmonic can come from that recombination process. And since it involves the interaction of both bands, it's an intra-band process. But it's not the only one that can happen in solids, as Paul described last time, but as well, you can have intra-band processes, which are nonlinear currents that come from each individual band. So for example, if the electron is driven past a point where the bands are parabolic, that can induce a nonlinear current that then can create high harmonics. And in solids, both have been proposed to occur, but in certain materials, they occurred. Yeah.
I'm really sorry to interrupt, but it's Ben here. We're on the chat. There's a number of us that are having a terrible time hearing you. Your audio is completely garbled.
Oh, really?
And Jeff actually had a suggestion that it might be worth reconnecting. I don't know if you have a better Wi-Fi signal there, but like for the last couple of minutes there, it's almost been entirely garbled.
Oh, is it bad now?
Right now I can hear you perfectly, but just for a period there, it was really difficult.
Okay, so if you can still hear me now, I'll keep going. And then if it becomes garbled again, I'll reconnect.
Okay, watch the chat window there.
Yeah. One thing, yeah, you might try turning off your video as well. It might cut down. Okay,
let me do that. And the chat window I don't see because I'm in presentation mode. So just interrupt me. Okay. Okay. So where was it? Oh yeah, so experiments have shown that both processes can occur, but different ones in different materials. So it's kind of material dependent. That's the idea. But in the zinc oxide, it was I think fairly strong evidence based on theoretical modeling at Uottawa by Thomas and Giulio and others that the intraband is the one that contributes the most. But what that implies is that when we're building a theoretical model, we really need to include both components.
Laura, I'm sorry to interrupt. I think still we have the problem.
You do? Okay, so should I try then just reconnecting?
That will be better, I would say, because we are not sure that in a certain period you will be okay, but again it appears.
Okay, so I will try reconnecting. Hold on. So I'll stop sharing my screen first.
Do you have any children playing video games in the background?
You know, I might go check on my son because he had school this morning, so he might be using it, but I'm not sure if he's done. So when I get off, I'll check and see what he's doing, and then I'll come back in a minute. Sorry, guys.
It is peculiar that when we discuss the problem of the voice, it sounds perfectly fine.
There was the same problem yesterday or on Wednesday with Judy.
Yeah, you know, I found that when people start with their presentations, if you could separate the presentation, it might work better. Like if someone else was driving the pitch.
Quantum optics never has this trouble. It must be an auto issue.
Don't pay enough for this Zoom account.
I've seen people sort of connect with their phone in order to get the voice to work, and then they drive the presentation with their computer, and then they don't have issues that way.
Right.
Okay, I'm back. Is that better?
Well, we can still hear you, but
Okay, well, I hope it's better. I did tell my son not to do any video or watch any videos, so hopefully it'll be better now. Okay.
okay, we can see your screen.
Okay, so I'll continue. Okay, so that kind of concludes my introduction to HHE and solids, just to give you an idea of the processes that are involved. Actually, I'll turn off my video too. All right. So now a brief introduction into nanophotonics and particularly nanostructure surfaces. So this is a large area. I'm only going to give a very brief overview just to give a feeling for what you need to understand the rest of the talk. So nanostructured surfaces, in a nutshell, they contain features and topologies that are nanoscale, so meaning of sizes 1 to several hundred nanometers, even up to the submicron. And so they occur naturally, actually, in many areas. For example, in insects like butterfly wings, beetle shells, but they also can be man-made. But they also arise in man-made objects also naturally. For example, nanocracks and steel welds. But the focus of this talk will be on nanostructured surfaces that are designed and fabricated on purpose. And the reason that they're interesting is because you can fabricate them with a high degree of control and precision, such as these that I'm presenting here, which are plasmonic nanostructured surfaces. But then through these surfaces, you can control the light-matter interaction and actually engineer it, because there's near infinite design space in terms of materials and geometry, for example. And so you can design the light-matter interaction in such a way that you get an optical response that does not exist in bulk materials or is very weak in bulk materials. So this is kind of a major focus of the nanophotonics generally. So one idea that's relevant for our talk was using such optical devices or optical surfaces to create flat optics. So essentially, this is an optical device that is nanometer scale thickness on these surfaces that can do things that bulk optical devices can do, and do many things that bulk optical devices cannot do. For example, these lenses have been proposed. You can design surfaces to create holograms. You can tune resonances on surfaces through various means to do beam steering, for example. You can, Ibrahim did a paper several years ago where you can use it to create structured light, etc. So you can do all kinds of neat things. But these nanostructured surfaces can also concentrate the light to nanoscale volumes. So what I was talking about before was like the far field response that you get, but here we're looking at the near field. So here's an example of two plasmonic nanoantennas. And we're looking at them near their resonance conditions. So the fields around them, which is what we plot here, are quite high. So you can see kind of within 10 nanometers of the ends or within the gap, you see enhancements of the field up to a factor 15. In reality, if you plotted this without the saturation at 15, which is what we did here, just to make it more visible, you would find that really close to the nanostructure edges, it goes up to 40, the enhancement factor. So for example, if those near fields are near material that has nonlinear optical processes that are allowed, you can then drive nonlinear optical processes and they would be very much enhanced. For example, so let's say in these structures, the near field was hitting a material that had a third order nonlinearity. Then you can get an induced third harmonic, for example, where it's coming from those hot spots, and the polarization that's induced would go like this enhancement factor, which is 15 cubed. So that would be like a polarization that's 3,000 times bigger than if the nanostructure weren't there. And then if you take that to the far field, you square it to get what your far field intensity is, and now you're up to 7 orders of magnitude. So the enhancement can be quite large. That said, these are small volumes, so the amount of surface that are actually experiencing that kind of enhancement is very small. So in practice, you're looking at enhancement factors of 10 to 100. But the fact that they are concentrated in the small volumes means that anything in the far field that you see is pretty much coming from those spots because they're so much higher than everything else. And so what that means is it gives you an opportunity to control the far field emission by controlling the linear fields that are near these nanostructures that are really driving the nonlinear optical process. So just in the way that you can get, flat optical devices that we mentioned before, that paper was about optical devices operating in the linear regime. You can also do similar things for nonlinear light. But even more so, or it's interesting as well, I should say, because compared to traditional nonlinear optical devices, these ones, the nonlinear optical process here occurs on a very small volume, meaning that the phase matching is all but guaranteed. So you don't have those phase matching worries and headaches that you have for regular nonlinear optical devices. And the small form factor makes it possible to integrate them into optical circuits, for example. So some people have called this like a paradigm shift in nonlinear optics. But I wanted to give you the basic concepts of the enhancement and the control. Okay, so here's some examples. The one on the left is enhancement of second harmonic generation, at the top middle, third harmonic, and even some experiments done here on enhancement of high harmonic generation that Paul talked about last time, using these enhanced near fields. But then the ones on the left, the two examples, are also how you can use that to manipulate and control the far field emission. So we have a high harmonic, a second harmonic hologram here. That's what's illustrated, as well as manipulating diffraction orders. Okay. So before we go on to the main part of the talk, I wanted to say a few words right here about computational methods, because that is going to be the focus of our work in this project. So most of the times, computational efforts are restricted or are limited to using linear simulations. So linear simulations are easy to do. You can use freely available software or commercial software, and they're usually quite straightforward. And so this will give you, for example, how much the linear field is enhanced. Okay, and so sometimes people will stop there, or sometimes they do some other linear simulations at the nonlinear frequency as well. to get better estimates for far field intensities, for example. But sometimes that's just not enough because of the nature of the interaction. And so what we are developing are direct nonlinear simulations for HHG. So we've done this already for other nonlinear processes. So for example, perturbative nonlinear optics, second harmonic, third harmonic generation, and others, where we implement the polarization or current sources right into the code itself. So it's a self-consistent full simulation. And so that's what we're doing here. And I'm not going to talk about it further because Antonio's going to talk about it a little bit later on, but I just wanted to highlight it here. And so this will be important for both of the goals that we talked about. Okay, so this brings me to the outline of today's talk. So we're going to split it up into 4 parts. So in the first part and the second part, we're going to be talking about our first goal, which is using high harmonic generation to measure fields. So Julia will talk about experiments that were done at the NRC, and I'm going to talk about some progress we've made towards field imaging, and in particularly methods of getting high resolution from short wavelength harmonics. And then parts 3 and 4, so Antonio will talk about our theoretical and design work in using fields near nanostructures to control nonlinear light, and our progress in developing the code to have a robust design tool for designing these nanostructures. And then part 4 will be by Andre, who will talk about experiments at the NRC towards this goal. And so now I will stop sharing my screen. And I suggest, since we have 4 parts and it's all kind of long, that we take questions at the end of the entire talk rather than each section. David, are you okay with that?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing and then I'll switch it over to Julio.
Can everybody see or hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you and I can see full screen.
Okay, good. And let me get, there you go. Okay. So part 1 will be about harmonic-based sensing of electric fields in space and time. The experiments were done initially at ALS, the Advanced Laser Light Source in Montreal, and in the end at the NRC. So we're going to start with what the system that we studied and what the fields were in silicon. And we chose silicon because it's relevant to semiconductor industry. Clearly, it's an inversion symmetric system. And so when you pump silicon with a 4-micron driver or a 2-micron driver, you odd harmonics of the fundamental frequency, here shown up until about the 17th order, which is about 200 nanometers. But I have data not shown that shows these harmonics extend all the way up to about 9 eV, which provides about 130 nanometer resolution. This is just a polar plot that shows how the harmonic spectrum depends on the alignment of the linear phasor polarization with respect to the crystallographic axis, with minima when the polarization is in between the silicon-silicon bonds, and maxima when the polarization is driven along the chains of the silicon lattice. Now, when we fabricate electrodes on a surface, on a silicon surface, and we apply 100 volts over 100 microns, about 1 volt per micron, which is about the field strength that you find in transistors. The DC field that you apply breaks the inversion symmetry, as you would expect from perturbative nonlinear optics, just simple arguments, and you get even harmonics, and those are pointed out here. They're about, in this case, 3% of the nearest odd harmonics. And in this case, with a 2-micron driver, they extend, we could measure up to the 8th order at 250 nanometers, mostly limited by the detection and the laser system they used. I'll show you later. All the even harmonics scale quadratically with the DC field strength, which is also what you would expect from a perturbative approach. This is, for second harmonic at least, it's understood as a third order process where two photons of the pump mix with one DC photon. It's also called electric field induced second harmonic, or EFISH. Of course, you can apply the same concepts to the higher harmonics where n photons, or n 2n plus 1 photons for the odd are taken from the field, and one photon of the DC gives an even harmonic photon. But in fact, we know that the harmonics scale non-perturbatively with the driver intensity, which is shown up here. In this particular case was zinc oxide, but the same happens in silicon. Shows a linear scaling, which is unexpected for these harmonics that would scale at the 4th, the 6th, and the 8th power if these were perturbative. So not being perturbative harmonics, clearly this understanding breaks down, but a more sophisticated understanding based on the theory of harmonic generation, excuse me, also gives a quadratic dependence of the even harmonic power with the DC field. At any rate, the DC fields that we applied were actually semi-DC fields. In fact, were 700 and so nanosecond pulses. In this case, this is about a microsecond pulse. And we could trace the pulse by delaying the electrical signal with respect to the optical pulse, and retrace the electrical pulse, which with the 6th harmonic, that's the red line, and compare it with the scope measure signal, and they're basically equivalent. We could do this also with terahertz pulses. This was done at ALS. Terahertz pulses were generated somewhere else, focused onto the surface, where they will overlap with the strong driver, and this terahertz pulse breaks the symmetry, creates even harmonics. In this case, we look at the 6th harmonics of a 2 micron driver. And again, we could trace the terahertz pulse quite nicely, and even reflections of the sapphire substrate where silicon is grown on. So we show this is a high bandwidth, fast field measurement technique. And of course, we can bring the imaging at this point. You can see here an image of the structures that we fabricated. The black area is a gold electrode that is biased at 50 volts. And then the red area is silicon underneath. This is an image of the 5th harmonic. So the other harmonics give you the electronic structure, but because they're largely insensitive to the electric fields, but they do care if there is gold, or there is silicon, or there is any other material in the focus. But if we look at the even harmonics, now in this case it's only the 4th harmonic, you can see that the contour of the electrode for polarization horizontal, it's the vertical edge that lights up, and then for vertical polarization, it's the top edge that lights up. And so this tells us we have a vectorial way to reconstruct the field. The field points outward from the electrode and really hugs the electrode, which we attributed to a Schottky contact between the gold and the silicon underneath. Here is another example. In this case, we have interdigitated electrodes, one row of electrodes grounded and the other one biased. Same results. Essentially, the field hugs the electrodes, and you can see for horizontal polarization, the field points outwards, and then for vertical, you can see this hot spot where the field essentially curls around the top of the electrode. And we can also see some damaged areas that essentially lightens up with field and also without the field. And here I show you a full perspective, space and time, of electrons that charge up. And now I guess I have to. So here you see an inset of the time profile of the pulse. It is going up and then down again. And here is an image. I think must be the 6th harmonic, if I'm not mistaken. And you can see the pulse lightens up and the electrodes charge and discharge and so on. So follow-up experiments at NRC done with a 4 micron reproduce the previous results. again here as interdigitated electrodes, an image of the odd harmonic, the seventh in this case, return the structure, the image of the sixth harmonic to return the fields. In this case, there is no voltage applied, but the damaged electrodes somewhat maintain the symmetry breaking that leads to the even harmonics. The goal then was to design circuits and see how electric fields propagate in more realistic circuits. This was the work done by Cinzia and Marco at the NRC, where they design essentially these structures. These are Austin switches, and I think they're called strip line. This is a mask, shadow mask, that they designed and had a company fabricate. And the idea is the following: one electrode is grounded, this other electron is biased, and when you pump 800 carriers in the gap between these two, you shorten this contact, you build up a field between these two, and this is where the 4-micron probe and where you measure the electric field is focused. They got the shadow mask, they did the deposition of the metal, I think it's aluminum, in Ottawa U. This is an image of the platen with the substrate and the shadow mask on top before the deposition, and this is an image of after the deposition. This is the setup, and essentially this is what they got. They were able to reproduce. It's not time dependent. It wasn't time dependent yet, but essentially focusing the 4-micron driver, you can sort of see there is a shadow black and shadow black. Those are the two strip lines without a DC field, and then when you apply, or when you shorten the circuit over there with 800 nanometer pumps, you can see a field building up between these two. So to conclude this part, we've shown that there is using harmonics is a non-destructive imaging for live circuits, and in principle can give us 100 nanometer resolution, given that silicon can emit harmonics up to 9 eV directly, and has more than a terahertz bandwidth. The challenges, of course, when we want to go forward with this, is that we would like to make use of this highest resolution, so moving from the visible to the VUV, but this requires high repetition rate lasers, more than 100 kilohertz, or at least in the mid-infrared and with ultra short pulses, and these are currently not available in Ottawa. Of course, we also need high NA optics, which in the VUV are not available, and this is where LoRa expertise comes in, and using diffractive imaging, and in this sense ptychography, to reconstruct the light from the diffracted signal. And I think I've concluded, so I can switch back to the next presenter.
Nice. Very nice.
Thanks, Julio. So I'm going to now present the second part, which Julio just talked about, which was a theoretical progress in this field imaging with the harmonic generation. And in particular, so this is just the image you saw. So as he said, it would be nice to be able to recover the full resolution that's possible from the high harmonics, especially in the VUV where there are no components, as he said. And so one way of doing that could be ptychography. And over the past couple of years, we've actually worked on ptychography for perturbative nonlinear optics for second harmonic generation that I'm going to talk about, which will form a basis for the ptychography we're going to develop for HHG. So just a few words on what ptychography is. So essentially, what you do is you illuminate an object with a beam. It doesn't have to be very tightly focused, and you collect a far field diffractive image. And the important thing is that you illuminate this object with the same probe over random positions across the object, and you have enough illuminations that the illuminations overlap with each other. So that means there's redundant information in the far field diffractive images. So you collect a set of these images, and then you use a computational imaging or computational algorithmic technique to reconstruct what the object was. And so this was developed for in part for X-rays where you can't have focusing objects. So there's no way to get the resolution of X-rays without focusing. Very difficult anyway. But this allows you to reconstruct the transmission function that the X-ray probe has traveled through. So you can reconstruct essentially the chi-1 of the object, and you can reconstruct the phase as well as the magnitude of the chi-1. And so that's a basic idea. And so the algorithm now proceeds like this. So you've already collected your data set. You have a set of measurements where they are overlapping, as I said. And then you take one of those measurements and in turn, you apply an algorithm where you go through each one and you try to make a guess at what the object is. So you start off with a random guess. So here I show a probe where it's just a black circle. So that means you know you have some kind of beam size, but you don't necessarily know exactly what the probe is. And you start with a totally random guess for the object.
Laura, it's really hard to understand you.
Oh, is it the volume problem again, or the audio?
Garbled.
No, it's
okay.
Like 10 seconds you're clear, and then 10 seconds it's garbled.
Oh no. Okay, should I try joining again?
No.
Can you maybe you can call in the service as someone suggested before? I think that really works.
Okay. Let me just see. So I can call in a number here. What number do I call?
I have no idea.
I don't think it's in the email.
No,
normally it's in the Zoom invitation. There is a.
Like from your.
No, I didn't copy the whole.
Okay. Yeah, if you let me know, I can call in. That's not a problem.
Well, you're clear right now.
Okay, I'll keep going then. Maybe it'll stay clear for a little while.
Laura,
okay, so,
if you lean forward a little bit, my impression is if you lean forward, then the signal seems to be stronger.
Okay, is that better? I will lean forward.
Okay.
Maybe it's my mic that's bad.
No, I think it's a digital problem.
Yeah, lean in.
Well, I'll lean in anyway. So here's the initial guesses for the probe and object. Okay, so you multiply them together. It's a linear process and you get is this not working? Just a second. Oh, that's good. It's okay. Yeah, I guess the exit field. Essentially your induced polarization. Is this okay? All right. So then you take your guessed polarization, which is complete garbage at this point, and you transform it to the far field. So you get a guessed far field, but you actually have the measurement because you've done these measurements. So you have some information, and that's what's going to be used to calibrate this iterative algorithm. So what you do is you take the magnitude from the far field image, which is the only thing you have, and the phase from your guessed far field, and then you get a hybrid far field. So it has the phase of your guess with the magnitude from the real experiment. Then you create a hybrid exit field. But you had a guessed exit field that started this whole process. So then there's update functions that are based on a gradient descent algorithm that then allow you to make new guesses for what your probe and object are. And so you repeat this process for all your measurements, get an iteration, and then you iterate that many times until you get convergence. And that actually does a really good job at extracting what the probe and object are. And it's been very successful over the past decade, I'd say. So we came into this problem because we were doing nonlinear optical microscopy theory in collaboration with Francois Legueret. And he developed a technique called interferometric SHG microscopy. So I'll just take you through what that is. So this figure I'm showing is just traditional SHG microscopy of cartilage tissue. And so cartilage contains collagen fibrils that have a strong Chi2 response, but based on the chirality, they don't all have the same chirality. Based on that, they can either have a positive or negative sign to their Chi2. Okay, and so what we're seeing here are bright spots where they measured significant SHG. So what they did is they used a confocal geometry and they raster scanned over their sample and they just collected how much intensity was at each spot, and this is the image they got. Okay, so you can see clearly here there are images that are bright and images that are dark. But as I said, the sign of Chi2 could be positive or negative. So if you have regions where there's some positive, some negative, in a 50-50 ratio, say, you might see something that's dark even when there's material there. And so that's why they developed this interferometric technique, because in addition to just measuring amplitude, you can measure the phase. And if you measure the phase, then you get a diagram or an image that looks like that, where you can clearly see, like in this blue box on the left, where it looks like there's nothing there, what it actually was a transition between two regions of different phase. But when you have the phase information, you can now clearly resolve that. In addition, in this yellow box on the left, you see, just a faint signal, but on the right, you see that it's made up, that you see the faint signal because it's made up of regions where the phase is alternating. And so by doing interferometry, you can then pick up that information. And so we were involved in this, the theoretical aspects of this, and then we thought, well, do you need to actually use an interferometer to get the phase information? Because a method like tachography can extract the phase. And so that's where we got into that. So one advantage is you don't need the interferometer, but the second is you also don't need a tightly focused beam anymore. You could potentially use a much broader or much bigger illumination spot and possibly image this much faster. So then over the past few years, we worked on this. So it was my former PhD student and postdoc, Jarno van der Kolk, who started the project, and it's now being taken over by master student, Evan Norris. And so the essence of the algorithm is kind of the same, except here the probe, instead of being the field, it's the field squared, and the object is now Chi2. And so we're trying to reconstruct Chi2. And so we tried that first with a numerical experiment where we generated a collagen sample. It was a tendon sample, so it has collagen fibrils that are basically all aligned, and so you can have some up, some down in kind of distribution. And so here's is a numerical sample. And so what we did is we made kind of numerical measurements on this to get a measurement set similar to what you might expect from an actual experiment. And we applied our reconstruction algorithm on that. And so we got this result. So here I'm just plotting the phase. Of course, we have data for amplitude too, but I'm not going to show that, just in interest of time. So we're able to reconstruct the phase pretty successfully. You'll see in areas where there's a lot of very small fibrils that are beyond the diffraction, like far beyond the diffraction limit. We sometimes don't pick those up, but we definitely pick up areas where it's larger, where they're larger, and we're able to see individual features down to 200 nanometers, where the SHG signal here is 400 nanometers. So we're really pushing to the diffraction limit. So the idea was, if you now apply a similar algorithm for HHG, we can get resolution down to, lambda by 2 of the harmonic frequency itself. So really trying to extract the most we can out of this, out of the resolution that should be inherent in the high harmonic. And so just a final note. So we recently won an exploration grant to pursue this with Francois in the lab, along with a medical researcher for Alzheimer's research. And so we moved towards vectorial reconstruction of Chi2, and so that actually has been quite successful. So here I just plot the 6 components of Chi2 that are relevant for collagen fibrils, and this is a sample of of collagen that has 10,000 fibrils in it. And so this was the magnitude of the originals. So the magnitude of the Chi2 components and the reconstructed. And you can see they look almost the same. You can barely tell I changed the slide. And as well, we're able to reconstruct the phase very well. Here's the phase of the originals, as well as the phase of the reconstruction. So here you can tell I changed the slide because the positive and negative regions change color, but that's just an overall phase factor. If you look at the colors, you can see that they're 180 degrees apart. So if I go back, but it reconstructs the features very, very well. And so the next step now for high harmonic is to bring this to high harmonic generation to reconstruct the induced polarization and extract those DC fields. And so this has been our progress towards that, starting first with perturbative nonlinear optics and getting good results, and now going to high harmonics. So I'm going to stop there because we're running short on time. And now Antonio's going to start talking about the theoretical aspects of the second goal.
So, hi. So I'm gonna talk about the third part of the goal, which is using fields near nanostructures to control HHG. So in the recent years, nonlinear plasmonics has become a very active research field, and it's basically about using plasmonic nanostructures to enhance nonlinear emission. So imagine, as Laura already mentioned, these plasmonic nanostructures or even dielectric nanostructures placed close to a nonlinear material. The nonlinear material can be, for example, in the gap, as in this case. The nanostructure can be totally embedded in the nonlinear material. So the goal is basically to enhance the linear field in specific regions where the nonlinear material is placed, so to enhance the nonlinear emission. So our group has been working in this field. So we basically studied, for example, the nonlinear emission from a hybrid nanoantenna, which is composed by a gold dipole with a nonlinear material in the gap, to understand basically what's the contribution of these two pieces for the nonlinear emission in the far field, since they are both contributing to the emission. And this was motivated by some results in the literature coming from experimental groups where there was a little bit of confusion about where the nonlinear emission was coming from. And this is a problem that from the computational viewpoint is possible to explore and address, coming to a conclusion, basically. So when it comes to using nanostructures to control, to basically manipulate the nonlinear emission, it's not just about boosting and enhance the emission, but it's also about controlling. So a lot of research has been pursued in this regard, trying to come out with ideas on how to design and arrange nanostructures on a surface to perform operations on the nonlinear signal. By engineering these nanostructures, it's possible to focus the nonlinear signal, to steer it, to structure it in complex ways, including, for example, for orbital angular momentum generation. And also in this area, we've been doing research by designing a nanoantenna which is able to control the linear field in the gap. So this nanoantenna is basically a chiral nanostructure with a gap. When it's excited via left circular polarization, shows field enhancement in the gap, and the field enhancement in the gap is not there for the right hand circular polarization. This means that any linear polarization is able to create the field enhancement in the gap. So this is an interesting property because it allows us to have the linear field enhancement in the gap no matter what's the orientation of the nanostructure with respect to an incident linear polarization. Using this linear field in the gap, which has a locked polarization, a pretty uniform amplitude, and a phase which depends on the orientation of the nanoantenna based on geometric phase principles, we can think of using this linear field to drive the nonlinear emission. So imagine now we place inside the gap a nonlinear material, and basically what we have is a nonlinear emitter. A nonlinear emitter having the same polarization of the linear field and a phase which is n times, when n is the order of the nonlinearity, the phase of the linear field. So we have used this design to create a distribution of nonlinear emitters on a surface, and in particular following this approach of progressively rotating the nanostructure of by a certain number of gamma of rotations per angle 2π. And by doing this, we simulated a full metasurface where all these nanoantennas are progressively rotated, in this case 20 times. So this is a linear simulation. You see that the orientation of the nanoantennas create the phase relation, and basically this creates a distribution of nonlinear dipoles in a near field that, once we project this distribution to the far field, we see a beam carrying a orbital angular momentum state of 41. So basically, this is a tool that we have available, a very to basically simulate metasurfaces for highly complex structured beams. So we are planning of using these simulation tools for this project with HAG. So we have expertise in high performance computing, parallel FTTD code, which is scalable up to tens of thousands of cores for large scale simulations. So the simulations that I just showed you, it's a simulation of a full metasurface, which the size is 10 micron times 10 micron with a resolution of 2 nanometer. So it's a very big simulation which took 30,000 cores to run for several hours. So combining this expertise in simulation and combining basically, so the FTTD method is, as you can see, is basically a solver of Maxwell's equations. We have the ability of basically modifying the current density, the polarization to model complex material properties. So here it's where basically the HAG comes in, because we have the tools which is able to solve this problem for very large scale problems, and we need to input something here to model the HAG emission from solids. So we've been working in collaboration with Thomas Brabeck and Andrew Parks at UORWA on this model for the interband and intraband current densities in a time domain form, which can be basically used in a finite difference time domain engine. I have some preliminary results for this model used for so to model the interband and intraband currents for a bulk material, in this case zinc oxide, where we see that for this material basically the interband contribution is higher than the intraband contribution. So this is what we are right now. Basically, the next step is integrating this model inside the FTTD engine and start using it basically to simulate the HHG emission from nanostructures. So my presentation is concluded, and the next speaker is Andrea.
Okay. Can you hear me, Antonio?
Yeah, we can hear you and we can see
Okay,
the screen.
good. All right, so I've got 3 minutes and 20 slides. I think if you're all still awake, I can get you through this. All right, so in this last part of our presentation, I'm going to tell you about the progress that we've made in structuring surfaces in order to get tailored or modify the harmonic emission from these surfaces, enhance them or other things. So as you've seen before, you can put nano antennas, put all kinds of things on surfaces, or you can structure them themselves. We've done this here. We've taken the approach where we've milled the surface using a focused ion beam. And we've had two types of samples. We have zinc oxide and silicon. And we've created wedges inside this, on the surface, or an array of cones. And here you can see these structures in SEM images. You can see the structures. The periodicity of these structures are in the order between 5 and 10 microns. So not nanostructures, but small micron size structures. So the idea is that we come with an infrared, mid-infrared laser beam, 2 to 2.4 microns at an intensity of 10 to the 12 watts per square centimeter at 70 femtoseconds and 10 kilohertz. We approach this sample, this milled sample, from behind, and the light that so zinc oxide or silicon being transparent to that wavelength, because the wavelength is below the band gap, propagates through this material, and in those nanostructured or microscopically structured material, it then gets through internal reflection. So on the right hand side, you see a cut through simulations of one of these wedges. You can see that the light is then propagating along these structures through internal reflection and gets amplified or focused to high intensity at those peaks, at the ridges, or also on the wall edges, and thereby can generate harmonics at these spots. That's the idea of the experiment. The real experiment in the lab looks like this. So you come in with this beam from an OPA, and it's being focused through a lens, obviously, onto the back of the sample. The sample can be moved around, and then you get the harmonic emission, which is of course diffracted out because you have these small structures there. So then you have we used a spectrometer on a goniometer and moved it around, and we obtained the structure here, or this image, which you can see in the bottom. This is the goniometer scan. So you see on the horizontal axis, you see the wavelength. So it's the wavelength that the spectrometer observed. One of these cuts is one measurement, and the diffraction angle on the vertical axis. And you can see there are 3 sets of peaks, which correspond to the 7th harmonic, the 5th, and 3rd harmonic. You can see that the harmonics are diffracting, so there are discrete peaks, so that means it's a coherent emission, and the diffraction angle also depends on the wavelength. So yes, What you can also see here around the fifth harmonic, you see some constant background. And this is an example for the photoluminescence. So that's an incoherent emission. That comes just from the band gap, which is at 3.2 eV in zinc oxide, so 380 nanometers. It does not diffract, and this is what you would get if you didn't have like an actual high harmonic emission. So that is in this range visible. Oops. Yeah, so instead of using a spectrometer, you can also put just directly a camera on there. So you see the different wavelengths at once, and this is what's shown here. So you take a Thorlabs camera and just place it behind the sample. And there you nicely can see, because in this case the harmonics are in the visible range, you can nicely see them and resolve these diffraction patterns in 2 dimensions if you have this array of cones, or in 1 dimension if you just have the grading. You can, of course, also image everything. You can image the structure using a high NA objective. I think it's a 0.75 NA that was used there. And then select for different wavelengths. Put a bandpass filter here, and then have your camera. So that was, and here the bandpass filter is being used to select different harmonics and get rid of the photoluminescence, which doesn't show you what you're interested in. Okay, so this is an example where we have put the, where we look at the fifth harmonic. So that's the one that is close to the photoluminescence region here. Okay, maybe what I should show here at the bottom, you see different wavelengths. So driver wavelengths, you can change the wavelength from 2 to 2.25 microns. And of course, longer wavelengths, the fifth harmonic then also moves to longer wavelengths, and thereby is better separated from the photoluminescence. The photoluminescence is just defined by the band gap, and therefore doesn't move. Okay, so next slide. So here, this is with 2.25 microns. You see the image of the ridges of this wedge structure, and you can see that the harmonics are being emitted along these ridges and not in between. The photoluminescence, on the other hand, is mostly in between. Okay, so next slide. And to show you this, how it looks in real time, or how it looks like in the experiment, I have a small animation here. So this is now the image where we have the fifth harmonic of the focus spot on the unmodified material, and now we're going to move the material, the sample, into with the wedges into the focus, and you will see this now as it moves down. So now there comes the modified structure, and you can see how it really lights up massively. All right, so that's one thing. I have another slide. Oops. Which one? Yeah, this one. So here we have now a filter on only the high harmonics. So so I think before that must have been the bandpass. There would be no bandpass, and this is now the bandpass on the fifth harmonic only. And so you see it a bit more clearly. Okay. All right. Yeah, you can do quantitative measurements of this intensity enhancement, and you can do intensity scans. And this is something that Julia touched on before. You can see here on the right-hand side an intensity chain, or an intensity scale. So you change the intensity by increasing the pulse energy of the driving laser, and then you see the intensity on the detector. And you can see that from the bulk, so the red dots is the signal that you get from the bulk, shown here in figure C. And at the same time, you kind of move then the structure into the beam focus, and you can see the light that comes out of this, and See, there's a dramatic increase in intensity at or in output at a given intensity compared to the unmodified surface. Both of them initially increase perturbatively here. You can see this here at the bottom. At low intensity, the bulk has a perturbative intensity dependence, namely according to 10 to the 5th power of the intensity. This is this dashed line, if you can see this. But if you go to high intensity, then you also get this intensity dependence to the power of the cubic dependence, which you have here for the harmonics on the ridges all the time. So that shows that it's non-perturbative, and it's our strong field-driven, recollision-driven harmonic generation. Okay, we've done some simulations, simple simulations to look at the field enhancement at those ridges, and you can see here our simulations say that's about 16 times at the ridge of the wedge, and it yields 10,000 times greater harmonic emission per area. So even though these ridges or the tips of these cones are really small, the emission is massively enhanced in those areas. Another thing, and I think I'm running out of time, so I'm going to skip this. I wanted to mention something. You've seen it. So even though there's a strong enhancement where these nanostructures are, we also noticed that near these regions there's also an enhancement. You could see that this was some halo around. There's a quantitative measurement here. You can see these are really small structures, but of less than, let's say, 50 microns. But you can see the enhancement it goes up to, say, 200 microns or so. And this is near these fibbed regions. So what we figured is that we took, so as you mill the surface with the focused ion beam of gallium ions, there's always some scattered, some halo around this beam, which then is just implanted in the region near these fibbed regions, and so gallium ions get implanted there. So we did a low dose measurement, low dose implantation experiment where we implanted these logos onto silicon. You can see them here now in a SEM image. The dark area comes from carbon contamination or so. And if you put our driving laser on that from behind, you can see these structures lighten up. There is no visible milling happening. There is some swelling about 2 nanometer where these regions are being implanted, but nothing visible. So it's not clear yet what the role is or what the mechanism is that causes enhancement for doped regions. Of course, this brings us now to the possibility of having flat optics in the VUV or in the UV. So we've also done we've implanted a structure that looks like basically a Fresnel lens structure, completely flat, 2 nanometer elevation, and use the same approach. And you can see these rings lighten up, and then this is when your imaging system is in focus with the surface of the material. Now you move the imaging system away by 450 microns, and you can see that the emission of these rings indeed focuses at a certain point, 450 microns for the 3rd harmonic or 750 microns for the 5th harmonic. Whoops, too fast. You can make a continuous scan of this. You can radially integrate this along these, or azimuthally integrate, really. That's what you do. And then plot this, and you can see, so sample here at 0, this is the distance from the sample. And of course, it's symmetric. So we move only in one direction here. And as you move away, you can see the different foci of the Fresnel lens. And you can do this for the 3rd harmonic and the 5th harmonic. And yes, so there is clearly a great potential in that. And if you take these data that you see here and you render them in Blender, then you can actually get a better impression of this, what this Fresnel lens does. You can see here the foci of one of these harmonics, the different orders of these foci. And all of this work was really driven by Dr. Murat Sevis from the University of Göttingen, with a group of Klaus Ropers. That's where the implantation and the fibbing was done, and the experiments were done here. And both of these guys, so Dr. Marco Taucher, who was a postdoc here in our group, these two guys drove these experiments. And with that, I'm done. Thank you very much. Oh yeah, I have some next steps, but I think I'm out of time anyway.
Okay, I think that's the end of the presentation. So on behalf of the audience, I will applaud and thank our speakers. Those who want to ask questions, oh, I see a number of hands. No, those are applauds. Okay. If you want to ask a question, please just speak up.
I have a question to Laura. I was wondering, what says the resolution in this dichography method you've talked about?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So generally the resolution is λ/2. So in the figures I've shown, it was about 200 nanometers. Because the SHG was at 400 nanometers.
So there's no limitation on the like other geometrical parameters you're saying, or?
Well, you mean like on focusing optics and all that?
Yeah, or some distances, or the area well, the size of the image, or something like that.
Well, here we were just looking at a reconstruction with no focusing optics in between. So that's something we're looking at now, actually, to see if this changes. But this is very similar kind of resolutions to what was observed in other experiments.
Can I add something? I think you need to get your camera close to get the high momentum scattered off.
Yeah, exactly. So you need to either get the camera close or have a collecting lens where you can collect it and put it on a CCD. So you need those as high angle as possible.
I see. So there's no way around high, well, probably of this. You really need to have this high NA to get high resolution.
Yeah, you need a high NA or something close, like Julia said.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Paul Finney, do I see you?
Yeah, well, I have maybe a simple question and a harder question. For Laura, I'm not from, just basic, I guess. This term tychography is new to me, but it looks like tomography to my mind. So I was wondering where tomography begins and ends, and tychography.
Oh, good question. Well, tomography is a 3D reconstruction where you're coming in at different angles, right?
Yeah.
So here you're coming in at the same angle. So you just probe changes just positions in X and Y. That's all it does. So it scans across the sample. And so then you have a set of images that's taken at the same place from the same camera. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it seems like it might be there might be some overlap in.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah. Okay. No, the other question was, I think for Antonio, maybe Julia. So you showed the images where the fifth and sixth harmonic looked very different, but I didn't quite pick up on the physics of why they should look different. Is that I mean, because there's a lot of difference between the fifth and sixth harmonic. Are we talking about symmetry or like polarization, or are we looking at wavelength as well, or what's going on?
Yeah, why the images of the fifth and the sixth look different, is that?
Yeah. Can you explain the basic physical picture, why they should?
It's because the other harmonics are largely insensitive to the symmetry breaking, whereas the even harmonics only come out when there is symmetry breaking. And so the other harmonics do not care to first order if there is a DC field or not. They only care if there is silicon or is metal or any other things that changes high harmonic generation. So they give you the structure. But the even harmonics, they only exist where DC fields are present. And so they give you the image of the distribution of the fields. Does that answer?
Okay, but at the same time, your fifth and sixth harmonic are quite different wavelengths, and the other things are changing.
Well, the resolution improves, or the higher you go, the better resolution.
Just because the wavelength is changing.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there is, if I can add to this, and Giulio certainly, of course, is aware of this. I mean, there is the idea that, I mean, you can see it even if you have no field in those damaged electrodes. And these fields, so you have local fields along these electrodes, and they're symmetric as long as the electrode is symmetric. So you get probably, and this suspicion that you get even harmonics even on those, because the laser field produces a local field at the electrode, right? And it switches around every half cycle. So you get an asymmetric field, but if the electrode is symmetric, then you get a phase shift in the emission of these even harmonics in a symmetric case, so they cancel out. But if you have a broken electrode, where you have a fractured surface or fractured edge, where you can't really have a symmetric cancellation, then you still see some even harmonics coming from those. I think that's right. Giulio, do you?
Yeah, well, though I would think that if you have two contributions from opposite sides of the electrodes, then and they interfere in the full field destructively, but if you image, you will still retrieve those.
If you can resolve it.
Yeah, if you can resolve it.
And this is something that we've tried, but we couldn't so far. I mean, maybe you could.
Okay.
Can I ask a question, David?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so just, I mean, I'm thinking in overall picture. So high harmonic has been shown in a gas or in gases, and also it has been shown in solid by you guys and some other colleagues. And I was thinking, since, I mean, I know very well that liquid crystal also is a good option. So, and even you have more control on liquid crystal. Do you know any works that they show high harmonics generated by liquid crystal? There are some good points. Pardon?
Thank you for asking.
Sure.
I remember explicitly telling someone to do this, but I'm not aware of any work. Yes, so, I'd be very interested.
So what I know about nonlinear properties of liquid crystal goes back to my PhD supervisor, which he worked with Shen in Berkeley. And at that time, they showed, let's say, cell phase modulation and also second order nonlinearity in liquid crystal. I see benefits there because these nonlinear properties can be controlled by temperature or can be controlled by applying external electric voltage, and it can be in a specific fashion and manner that you want. For example, the pattern that you created, nanocones one, I understand that you want to have a high fields at the let's say tip of the nanorods, but can be done easily in liquid crystal. And the size of liquid crystals, essentially, if you're imaging in terms of, let's say, rods, it will be about 5 angstrom by 20 angstroms. So we can go down based on writing skills that you may have. and even maybe, let's say, injecting and interacting it directly with the nanorods that you created there. So the nonlinear property may be enhanced there. So keep it as a thought.
So if I can comment on this, clearly they're very small. However, how precisely can you control the field, right? I mean, at some point you're limited by how small you make the electrodes on this on the crystals. That's my first comment. But what I'm interested for nonlinear liquid crystals is that they're probably very anisotropic with regards to harmonic generation, which is good, and also they sort of can be seen as linear chain molecules in a sense, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, which to me is interesting because of the fundamentals of it.
Can I add to Ibrahim's question? So when you mentioned the high harmonics from liquid crystals, a few years ago I've talked to a postdoc from Ursula Keller's group, Laura Cataneo, who found this. I think she did her PhD along these lines somewhere, and she thought this would be something that she wants to do in the future. And I just looked her up again, and she's now leading a new group at the Max Planck Institute in Heidelberg, where she's doing high harmonics and liquid crystals. So
good, excellent. And
I know someone else who has done it too. I think it might be Shima, but somebody else has looked at high harmonics from liquid crystals. It might be Shima. It's the girl in Florida who's coming as a postdoc.
Sorry. Hi. I haven't done it so far. I had been thinking about it, but nothing that we did so far. We've been more like focused on the structuring or shaping crystals to compensate for the different divergence of different orders. And if you guys don't mind, I just ask a question right now, just along the line, because I wanted to ask Andre about that. Maybe I missed it in your slides, but is it something that you've been considering just to compensate for the divergence on the different harmonics orders?
Oh, so I'm not sure. So in the I mean the small structures, of course, they diffract the harmonics, right?
Yes.
And that's where the flat optics Fresnel lens comes in, right?
Yeah.
But we haven't. So the Fresnel lens is strongly chromatic, so we haven't really thought of trying to compensate for that. In order to say what you may be suggesting is, can we make something that can focus actual attosecond pulses into one spot instead of poking discrete harmonics? No, we haven't considered that yet.
But would you see it as a viable solution?
I have to say, I'm not sure.
I think so.
Julio?
I think so.
Possible with the different materials?
No, with inverse design. I think you can try to make it broadband.
Okay, so this is one thing that I've been thinking about recently. So maybe later, if we can have a talk on that, Andre. I was thinking about just starting from something with higher damage threshold, like sapphire maybe, or just want to see what your thoughts would be on that. Also, Julio, if you don't mind, we can maybe talk later about this.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Julio's all eager to get into this.
Thank you.
Okay, I think I'm going to step in here now. It's almost cutting into my lunchtime, which would be serious. Well, Kabat, he just turned himself off. Kabat, did you have a final question?
I did, but I don't want to cut into your lunchtime.
Well, you may as well go ahead.
Okay. This zinc oxide related question, hopefully quick. Did you look into polarization dependence? And the reason I'm asking is that compared to silicon, zinc oxide has spin orbit coupling, and I imagine the spin orbit coupling would affect any intraband high harmonic generation because it would sort of pull out an electron.
Yes. So no. Short answer is no. We did not look at the polarization of the harmonics, and barely at the dependence on the IR polarization. I think Shima has done some work, but what I know is that most of the electrons come from the split-off valence band, and so that I think that is because of the spin orbit, if I'm not mistaken. So in a sense, there are opportunities, but no, I have not looked.
Okay, well, I'd like to thank our 4 speakers, and I'd like to thank our audience for staying till the end. So another series next Friday. Thanks, everyone, and goodbye.